All the shows A to Z and the facts. What's behind what you see? TV Guide. The whole world of TV. That's entertainment. The stars underneath all the glow and the news. From the people who know TV Guide. It's a fabulous show. So buy TV Guide, then read TV Guide. That's entertainment.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and joining me, I have James. Say hi, James.
Hello, hello.
Well, today we are going to talk about something a little different, and I know we always tell you that, and it is not Star Wars for a change, which is another thing we sometimes tell you. This time, we're not going to talk about one specific movie or television show or any specific thing. We're talking about something very general, and that is TV Guide. Nowadays, most people probably have no clue what a TV Guide is because even though you could still kind of technically buy it in the store, they have a magazine version, I believe. It's not the TV Guide that James and I grew up with. Now, before we get into detail as to what these things look like and what they were all about, let me first let James take over a little bit because he was exposed to it before I did. I came to the States in 1979, so I didn't have access to or a need for a TV Guide until I actually got here and started watching television religiously, basically, you know, how television kind of started to consume, you know, most of my free time. But James, obviously, you're a child of the 70s. So tell me about your introduction to TV Guide and you know, what purpose did it serve you?
Well, TV Guide was a big deal to me because I watched a lot of TV. There's a show called Dream On with Brian Benben. It used to be on HBO, ironically.
Oh, yeah.
It was about a kid who grew up sitting in front of the TV, essentially, and watched
I
everything.
remember that. That's a good show.
The show revolves around him relating his life to things that happened in the sitcoms and the TV shows that he was exposed to. And I really like that show, not because it was fantastic, but because I could kind of relate to that a lot of what I remember, a lot of how I remember things revolve around TV. And then TV, again, was the gateway into movies because we've talked about how we'd watch some of these movies, the Planet of the Apes, we probably got our first exposure by TV, the Ape Week, and then the Godfather Week, and then the Airport Week, or things of that nature. And I would imagine almost every home had a TV Guide because it was that big of a deal. And you got the TV Guide so you'd know what's on. But besides that, and having the pages of telling you what's going to be on, and that in and of itself is amazing that there was that sort of dedication that far back. Now, everything is so organized, and you can tell what is going to be on probably 5 years from now, the way the grids work and the way people talk about things on the internet. But back then, you know, it was amazing that you even got the TV to work half the time with the antenna or the rotor or, you know, eventually if you had cable. But that wasn't easy, especially ironically in the big cities. It took longer for a big city like New York to get cable than it did for some places in the Midwest or the rural areas, as you would say. But TV Guide, something about it, it was not as big as a regular magazine. Most magazines are probably like the 8 by 10
it was kind of like a Reader's Digest size.
Yeah,
if anybody even knows what that is, because I'm sure most people don't even know what that is.
Look up what that is. We'll do a show on that next month.
A little bigger than a paper, like a DVD. If you think of a DVD you buy in the store,
I would
that
say
little
that's
square,
right.
That's pretty much the size.
And it always had a big red square on top, or, you know, relatively square, that said the words TV Guide. And the rest of it would have some sort of picture or artistic drawing or compilation of images related to some big show, or, you know, something that was going to be on if it
that
was
week,
your favorite show.
That particular week.
Or even if it was a feature on, say, MASH, or a feature on All in the Family, or something from the 60s, you know, Get Smart, I'm sure. I mean, if these things were on it. And there'd be a story, basically that would be the cover story, and there'd be a little story about that, or the making of it, or what's, you know, what they're doing, or the new show, whatever it is about. There would also sometimes be a feature on an actor, or some type of expose or something that was changing in the television industry that people might be interested in, or some regulation, blah, blah, blah.
Well, that's the thing to keep in mind, is that even though you started in the 70s and I started in the 80s, we're still dealing in a landscape where there is no internet. So you want to get any kind of news having to do with television and entertainment, unless you're a company insider and you subscribe to Hollywood Reporter or Variety or one of those newspaper magazines. TV Guide was kind of like the poor man's version of a entertainment TV magazine without having to really go and get like People magazine or anything like that. So you had your grids, like you mentioned before, and you had your little articles having to do with entertainment related information from television, right?
And this has been around longer than both of us. And
almost
as long as, well, a little bit after my parents, but not too much after. But it got bigger and bigger, and I don't mean by the size of the magazine. That didn't happen for quite some time, but it got bigger in the sense that it started out more like as a small-time thing, a more regional thing in the late 40s, but the era that we know the TV Guide as started in the early 50s, and it just, like I said, it just kept going and going, and there'd be more to it, and it became a very important thing to the point where, like when we talked about Starlog and people who collect Starlog like ourselves, or Rolling Stone magazine.
Or
even Playboy magazine, it became a collectible of its own because
it was his own. It's his own thing. The
iconic drawings or the iconic artwork, and the fact that pop culture kicked in with TV. That if there was a cover with the Beatles, or if there was a cover with some other huge thing, it became a collector's item. And I have to admit, in addition to all the other nonsense that I collect, I have a very small, albeit iconic in itself, collection of TV guides. And by that, I mean things that had Star Wars on it, things that had Peanuts, The Simpsons, Miami Vice, Battlestar Galactica, shows that I was big into. I would wind up saving. And it was an accident at first. It was just be like, oh, I like that picture, and I'll keep it in my closet. And then little by little, I had a stack. And then little by little, I had a couple of stacks. And this is just something that goes, what we do. We collect. And I want to do a show on that and what it is that makes us feel like we need to have it. Is there something that we were missing, so we felt we have to hold on to things? Or are we that attached to pop culture that we want to have everything? And I think it's a combination of the two. But the biggest, most important thing, I know it sounds silly, other than the cover of the TV Guide, was a special thing called the crossword puzzle. And that was a big deal. Now, that wasn't a hard thing. Like, people who do crossword puzzles will goof at the TV Guide crossword puzzle sometimes. New York Times is known to have an important crossword puzzle. If you can do the New York Times crossword puzzle with a lot of cheating, and by cheating I mean asking or looking things up, you're probably relatively smart. The TV Guide one wasn't as tough in terms of smarts, but it was tough sometimes in terms of knowing pop culture or TV or things like that. And I would say I avoided it when I was younger because I figured, that's for the adults. But when I did give it a go, I wound up being pretty good at it because I knew so much minutia about TV and movies and pop culture and people who appeared on game shows or people who appeared on Merv Griffin and things. So, you absorb a lot of that, and eventually you become a sponge, as we've talked about this stuff.
Well, I never got into the crossword puzzle thing, but I do remember that I got to a point where I always look forward to the next issue in terms of not so much for the articles, but just to plan my weekly viewing of what was coming. And I remember I would kind of get a little antsy about being able to go supermarket shopping with my parents on a certain date, because if I went a little too late, then I would be buying a TV Guide that had already started. So I always wanted to get it before the actual week would start. This way I can map things out. So
and that was a big deal too. It would come out, I'm going to say it would come out on like a Tuesday the week before. I could be wrong. It could have been a Wednesday. It could have been I think it went from Saturday to Sunday or something.
I think it started on Saturday and it ended on Friday, if I remember right.
So I feel like you got it several days ahead of the week that it was representing, but that was great, and you'd know. Now, when I was younger, it would just be something, what's on? You'd look and say, I think BJ and the Bear is on, and there's a very special episode that Sheriff Lovo crashes his car again. Oh, okay, well, let's watch it, But as we got older, and I know you and I have talked about this, you might plan your week, or you might plan, your social calendar, which was probably pretty limited for both you and I when we were younger.
And this might also be pre-VCR age also. We don't
definitely
have recording capabilities yet, not until the mid-'80s.
I didn't have a VCR until, I think like 83 or 84.
Yeah, 84 for me, yeah.
Yeah, and so this was a big deal, and you don't want to miss something. And I can tell you, I can do an episode on things that I missed the first time around that haunted me till, maybe even a few years ago. I had to go back to catch up when they finally would come on, either Netflix or the like, whatever it is.
Well, I'll tell you what
Hulu.
I definitely didn't miss was the making of Empire Strikes Back special effects special on CBS.
That's right.
I don't know how I heard about it. Maybe it was through TV Guide, but same thing with the making of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was always there for those.
Star Wars was for me. That was,
and I remember I would record them on audio cassette because that's how crazy I was back then.
And we've talked about that. I did that with the Monkees, and I still have the audio tapes of certain episodes I could tell you about, and I don't want to erase them because, or throw them away. Even if it comes a time I can never play it, that's such a big deal. Like I said,
it is.
We revolved, sadly, maybe, but since we wound up in the television film industry, I don't think it was such a bad thing. If I had a son or daughter right now, I would probably say, based just on the simple fact, read more things that you'll make money with than TV. And even though I'm kind of making money and we can dance around that all night, it's best to read tech manuals or read medical journals or something like that. But anyway, back to our story. It was such a big deal to get the TV Guide and go through it. And I can remember sitting on, and I still have a rocking chair, like a Lazy Boy rocker or something. And I remember back then we had a recliner or something, and I'd sit on that. And I would just go through it and say, "Oh, what's on?" And I wouldn't look so much into the mornings or daytimes because I was a kid and I went to school. But I would look and say,
right, it was prime time. We were all about prime time, and I don't know about you, but I was all about the fall issue that showed all the kid shows that were coming next year that I would go completely insane over.
I can
all the
still
cartoons.
remember. I can still remember the fall preview that explained the Dukes of Hazzard. And I saw, you'd see the name and then it would say, "Oh, the Dukes of Hazzard, blah, blah, blah." And it would tell you show and some of the stars and what they're hoping for and what night it's going to be on and big blah, blah, blah. But I remember seeing the name and kind of glossing over it and go, Dukes of Hazzard. Well, that sounds like medieval or something because they're dukes. I'm figuring dukes and duchesses and stuff. So I just blew it off. So I probably missed the first few episodes of a show that wound up being a big deal for me. You know what I mean? Eventually, I saw every episode, even the crappy Coin Vance era. But other shows you'd watch, you'd look and say, okay, 4 o'clock, Channel 5 in New York, The Brady Bunch. 4:30 was The Monkees. 5:30 was maybe Gilligan's Island. 6 o'clock was something, and then there was the news. There was the local news. Before they had local news coming on at 4 or something. Oh, the 4:30 movie, or the early whatever it was. I think Channel 7 in New York had the 4:30 movie. It would go from 4:30 to 6:30.
And this is also a time where it still wasn't the listings were not super crowded with cable. You're still dealing with your basic over-the-air signals.
We're talking.
So there's plenty of room for reading.
Three networks, three proper networks. Channel 5 in New York, which is the area I grew up. Channel 9. Channel 11. They were the non-networks local, but they were pretty
PBS,
big deals. PBS was Channel 13
and one or
New
two
York.
Spanish channels.
I might have gotten them, but I never went to them. But I also grew up in an area where I got Philadelphia and New York. So then we had 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, and then in Philadelphia we had 3, 6, 10, 12, and maybe if you were very lucky and it was a good day and you had your rotor and you could turn to it, you might get channel, I don't know what it was. I think it was channel 29. When we got into that whole UHF area, that was like a foreign land for me sometimes.
Yeah, that was weird because that was also around the time when cable started kicking in. I remember there was a channel called U68, I think, which was a music video channel. It was all ghosty and rainy. You could barely get reception, but hey, it's free music.
So TV Guide probably was a big deal for me into the early 2000s. At some point, maybe the late 90s or so, there was a change of it from the smaller style to a magazine size, and it had changed hands over the years.
Yeah.
And ironically, the company I am presently employed by, the parent company of the company I am presently employed, owned TV Guide for a period of time, which has nothing to do with this episode. But that's probably around the time they changed it to a proper magazine format, which they figured was probably a little cheaper, easier to get seen, things like that, because there was more competition. People didn't need TV Guide. Once the cable boxes came, there would be a cable. I think locally there would be something on like the local cable company that you paid for would have their version of a TV grid. Then eventually it became the TV Guide channel, which had their own grid.
Well, at first what they had was a dedicated channel that would scroll the entire thing, but you couldn't control it. If you missed the scroll,
that turned into a channel with that turned into a channel that had actually some programming or some looped.
Oh no! I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about just a grid that goes up and down, and if you miss it, you got to wait another 5 minutes to recycle back in.
And then as cable and there are more channels, when there was like 150 channels, you're waiting 5 minutes to see what's on channel 2
It's not like today where you have an actual menu that gives you the channel guide and you control it at your own speed. Now, the TV Guide tried to keep up with it. They started to incorporate their own cable listings, but that was basically the end. People didn't have the patience anymore to go and search through stuff.
Yeah, and then DirecTV, for instance, or the big cable companies would have their own. You could scroll to it. You clicked on it, so right away it was taking you. You didn't need a magazine, and I would imagine, speaking for myself, people who are in their low to middle 40s, probably and higher, probably stuck with TV Guide a little longer. I would bet you most people younger than that gave it up pretty easily because there was no as much emotional attachment.
Well, I gave up on it after the 80s. When the 80s were done, I was done. Basically, when cable came to town, I started drifting away because that started. And I know you have the same thing that I did, was ordering the actual HBO Guide.
Well, let me make it clear. There were other ripoffs or not really TV Guides. You started to get some with the Sunday paper would have a TV listings or
right, but most major papers had their own television guide, daily or weekend. That
all came like in the 80s. TV, like I said, TV Guide went, and you can still buy it. I'm not saying it's gone, but I haven't bought one. I subscribed probably into the early 2000s, but once DirecTV kicked in, eventually it was getting to the point where, all right, I didn't like the change to the magazine. It kind of just wasn't the same, and then I wasn't even looking at it. I would look at the cover, breeze through it, and it's just like any of those things. When you have the internet, you don't need to worry about holding something like that.
Don't even add computers into this.
But since you mentioned cable, we mentioned this whole cable guide things. What was very important to me, which I started seeing, I'm going to say late 70s, but definitely by 1980, was what they called the HBO Guide. Now, the HBO Guide was even smaller and thinner than a proper TV guide from that era. It was like a pamphlet, but it was shiny. It was well made. It was maybe, if you figure it out, it was maybe 30 pages if it was that.
Maybe.
It probably got to that. When it first came out, it was probably less pages than that. But they started to have really cool covers again, and I can remember some iconic things like Jaws 2. I remember one of my first ones was because we got HBO, what did I say? I guess 82-ish? And so maybe even late 82, early 83. It had to be like late 82 based on what movies were out. And it was awesome to have this with another cool picture on it. And every month would be, whatever the big movie that was, the really big movie that was coming out. So, for instance, there's bring it back to Star Wars. When Star Wars finally made it to HBO, and this was, again, like I said, 82 or 83, so that's a long time after the original release in 1977, had R2 and 3PO on the cover. I remember, again, Jaws 2. I remember Saturday Night Fever, a Raiders of the Lost Ark, James Bond movies sometimes.
No, what was also cool is that you, at the last page, all the way in the back, you would also have the preview of the following month.
Yeah.
And it was like, ooh, next month so-and-so is coming, that sort of thing. And you know what else? You could still, I think you could still find those HBO guides at hotels. Sometimes you see them at hotels.
That's how I first got exposed to, the gateway again, how I got exposed to it in the dirty hotel room. But I would remember going on trips, my parents, if they were going on business or even if we were traveling, and then I would sit there and I'd look through the entire HBO guide. And if I were on vacation, I can remember being on vacation. What year did Superman 2 come out? 1981? I remember going to Washington, D.C. It was the exact weekend of the premiere of Superman 2. We snuck in. I dragged my grandmother. We took a cab, my brother, my grandmother, and I snuck into the premiere of Superman 2. I know it's a crazy story. I can tell it. But there was a line outside this theater. We're like, let's go in. We just stood on line and then eventually realized, I look around and I go, this is bigger. This isn't just some movie. And the line is around the back of the building. So we kind of, like I said, we got away with one. But other than when I saw that, I would say, okay, 2001 A Space Odyssey's on. Gonna watch it. Black Hole's on. Not going to miss that. Maybe a Planet of the Apes or a James Bond movie. Got to watch that. Now, this is on vacation. I'm supposed to be a tourist wandering around the city. And I was like, nope, I'm going to stay and watch this. So that was my first real love affair with HBO. And again, like I said, basically we got HBO, and most of our shows that we do have some connection to what we saw on HBO.
Well, let me mention one more thing about, and this might have happened also around the time where TV Guide tried to incorporate, cable listings within it. And that is around the time when VCR started popping everywhere, like you said earlier, 83, 84, 85, there was a system within VCRs. I forget what it was called, but instead of having to punch the actual start and end time, you would punch in a code, and TV Guide started incorporating those codes so that it was a quick way of setting your VCR to record certain shows. And I remember that's something that I could never figure out. For some reason, my VCRs either did not have the system, but I would always be like, damn it, I wish I had a machine that could just punch in these damn codes without me having to set all the different speeds to save space and all that stuff.
Well, let me tell you how crazy this is that you mentioned that, because it was called VCR Plus.
That's right.
And I still have it because I have one VCR still in operation. Mine has VCR Plus Gold, whatever that was.
Well, did you ever use it? Do you remember ever using it?
Yeah, I remember it. Let me tell you the drawbacks of it. As good as it was to punch in this code, rather than having to click on, okay, Thursday night, the 27th, and then Monday, the whatever, blah, 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 you would type in whatever the code was, and it would start, and if it was going to be a show that was on every week at 8 o'clock to 8:30. It would record from 8 o'clock to 8:30. But what sucked was, and I'll tell you, you had to go back in manually anyway, because sometimes it would cut off the very beginning if it started at 8 and something happened, or if it went slightly, like some shows sometimes would go longer because of a football game or news break-in or something.
Well, that still happens even with DVRs these days. Sometimes you get cut off because of sporting events or news.
That was a fluke. If you weren't around, you'd be like, it started halfway through and it cut off at the end because of the football game ran over. But no, I do recall if I was going to record anything and eventually you could tell it. Now, you could say, I want to record every Thursday night. Originally, you can say, I want to record every Thursday night. And then you would say, okay, I want Cosby Show all the way till, was it like, let's say Hill Street Blues or something. I don't even know if that was, it was Cosby.
The whole primetime lineup.
It was Cosby, then it was something else, then it were Friends or Cheers was on at 9, and then there was some other like a Night Court, and then let's say it was Hill Street Blues. Okay. So you would have to tell it to start, I would say, 7:58. And then on Thursday, every Thursday you would have to tell it. And then I'd have to say end at 11:03 or 11:05 because you didn't want to use up too much VCR space either. So you had to be careful. So we got off on that tangent, but that's just craziness from the era.
But that's good that, the TV Guide tried to incorporate all these new technologies to help their viewers.
They stayed,
readers.
Pardon the pun, relatively relevant. But, times change so quick from the 80s on that it just got tough. But back to the important stuff, having these guides and the TV Guide, the HBO Guide, I guess even Showtime might have had one.
Showtime had one too. I remember I used to order that one too.
I didn't have Showtime. We weren't that rich. Come on, man. But the thing is about getting to cable. So you go through most of your early life with just the 3 networks. Then then you start getting HBO, and there was WHT, Showtime, Cinemax.
Well, that's the thing. You got to remember that we didn't go straight from regular broadcast to 100 cable channels. My first one was, my town had WHT. I couldn't tell you how to get it. I don't remember because it was too expensive, but I remember seeing the commercials for it. But we got our hands on a microwave antenna that would get you HBO. And that was the kind of like the back way of getting cable in areas where cable wasn't available yet.
Well, pardon the pun, I'll tell you even more of a back way is before they really found a way to scramble it, it would be slightly scrambled, but generally, if you sat on the channel long enough, it would just be like a haze over it. And I can't tell you how many shows I watched with just the haze over it. And I'm not talking about HBO. I mean, maybe HBO, but I'm talking about the other ones like Cinemax or Showtime or something.
Right.
So Cinemax was known for like a little bit more, we'll say dirty movies, but they're more blue.
Really?
There would be a little bit more sex.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah. So like late at night, you could catch that. And I remember watching the heavy metal movie the first time, like either it was on HBO properly paid for, because my parents, strangely enough, one day I came home in 1981 or 2, and there's a telephone with my own line in my bedroom and a color TV with HBO. And I'm thinking, am I in this bizarre world? Did I hit the jackpot? Like, I didn't even have to ask or pressure them. And it was like, oh, well, we think this is a good idea. Maybe they got religion or something, or somebody, they were like fantastic to do this. So I didn't even have to leave my room. I've got a phone. I can call my friends. I've got a computer with the early, CompuServe or whatever it was, so I could go online with whatever that. It wasn't even a name for it back then. I had TV, color TV with all the channels. But remember this: there was really, we were really tortured back then because you had to get up and click the box that was on top of your TV.
Oh,
and then maybe if you got lucky, you got this little remote control that basically changed the channel, but then you still had to get up and turn the volume up and down, or the horror of it all, turn it on and off.
I didn't experience that until later because, like I said, first I had this microwave antenna that I remember we set up that antenna in our fire escape. I lived in a building, and the antenna would have to point towards the Empire State Building. That's how you would get the signal. But the only thing that you could get is HBO. You would have to fine-tune it with a little box to kind of fine-tune the channel. When cable finally reached Queens and then people started laying cable in the streets and feeding all the buildings. First company that I dealt with was probably Time Warner or one of these companies. I remember, sometimes when you would switch from one channel to the other, you would get that other channel that you did not subscribe to for maybe a second or two, and the picture would be there, and you're like, yeah, and then it's gone. But
even if you didn't subscribe, you'd always get the sound. They'd never scramble the sound until years later.
And sometimes you get lucky and you get maybe 5 minutes of something you're not supposed to get.
and I'll tell you, I'm just such a loser that I would sit there listening to the sound of something that I'd recognize, and I would just have it on while I was doing homework, even if I didn't pay for that channel. And then at times there would be, I can kind of remember, this is a weird one because I'm not sure, I can't explain this. In 1973, Elvis played in Hawaii. It was a big deal, and I think it was kind of like the early version of pay-per-view. They used to do it the giant Ali fights. You'd have to go into like the garden, or you'd have to go into a bar or something like that. And again, they had that special satellite that you're talking about, like a microwave or something. But this, I can remember somehow we weren't supposed to be getting the Elvis Hawaii show. It was something that you had to do it special or pay for it, whatever that was. But we wound up getting it, and like I think we were jiggling like the antenna and like putting a spoon next to it, and you could hear it, and every now and then you'd see it. But I can remember it, and I know that's crazy, and I wish I could figure out why, because that's so long ago. But it's just one of those things. I'll never forget probably the show, and it's such an impact on me, even when I hear his music from that, because of that stupid trying to figure out how to get TV.
Oh, yeah.
And it all comes back. I mean, aside from it all coming back to TV, it all comes back to TV Guide and just studying it and reading and figuring it out and knowing what was coming and who people were.
And like we said earlier, as technology progressed, it made TV Guide irrelevant. From DVRs to cable to internet, it just pushed it away aside. Now, granted, like you said, you can still go and buy it. Some people still buy it. I guess it works for some people.
I bought one. I can tell you, I bought one a couple years ago because it was some anniversaries or something was happening, but it was specifically an anniversary of General Hospital, the soap opera, and they had a cover that had a little story in it, but it was a cover that was of Luke and Laura. And I remember they did something with Captain Kirk, so I don't know if it was TV Guide's anniversary or if it was just a coincidence that these different tie-ins. And I said, you know what? And it was not cheap anymore either. I think it's $5. It used to be for years like a quarter. Then it went up to like a 50
it was under
cents.
$1 when I was buying them. I remember.
I feel like it was like $6.99 or more the one that I was buying because maybe it was because of a special issue. And I'm saying, I'm buying this out of nostalgia and I'm throwing $6 or $7 down to something I probably won't even look at. And I may not even, other than thumbing through it just to say, hey, what's in a TV Guide nowadays? It's probably still in the bag I bought it from Target in, and I may never even look at it again, which is pretty much my whole collection of things that I never will look at again, but I feel the need to own it.
But no, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's unfortunately, it's not like it didn't go bad. In other words, it's not like, oh my God, the articles are horrible. No, it's the information is just we're used to getting it much faster, at our convenience. And even if you used to subscribe to it, some people would subscribe. It would come to your house and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I did a 5-year subscription once because some of these magazines, they would give you this super ridiculous cheap rate if they knew they could lock you in, like a Car and Driver would do it, and Entertainment Weekly would do it, and a couple of the other ones. And I did it. And then eventually it was, like I said, coming, and we were just putting it on a pile because nobody was really even looking at it. There was no need for it. We weren't watching TV as much. But I will say, you do when you think about these things, there is a fond nostalgia for it. And it's usually good feelings attached to it. In my case, as silly as it, I know Seinfeld did an episode, a goof on it back, and this was still, what was it, the late 90s, the middle to late 90s. Yeah. There was an episode where George's dad collected TV Guide, and I guess Elaine grabbed it to read it, and Al Roker was on the cover.
You don't take a man's TV Guide.
Yeah, and he was so pissed, and it turns out, I got a collection back to, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not quite there, but I could, during that episode, I laughed a lot because I could relate to him based on all the other dopey things I collected, plus the fact that I did have some TV Guide in my stash.
But yeah, even Starlog magazine, which we've done shows about it in the past, after a while, it kind of becomes obsolete because there are easier ways of getting that information that are cheaper and better. So don't be surprised if you go to conventions or any type of comic book shows or book shows, you are going to see some TV Guide dealers that are, they have these guides, they're all backed up individually.
There are some on eBay. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and you might pay some serious dollars for these things.
I recall seeing a guy liquidating his TV Guide collection. He had Life magazine, which was also it was a oversized thing, and it had awesome pictures from, people back in the 50s and 60s. National Geographic, and maybe he had like Playboys or something. And there's some pretty big deals. Like over the years, certain artists, certain writers, certain other whatever situations. Getting them, like I remember Rolling Stone, I would collect certain ones because of the bands or the artist, or when they got into actors, it was a big deal. So we're pretty sad in a lot of ways, but I think it made us who we are. And I guess, we respect some of this old stuff. It's like all the lonely payphones that are in the world right now because nobody ever goes to them except,
what happens to all those payphones? Do they just sell them to movie companies to use as props?
I guess. I mean, I have noticed lately there are still you kind of look right past it. Nobody even cares. It used to be like, where's their payphone? Gas station, bus stop, side of the road.
What happens to all fire hydrants?
It's funny you should say that. I had a fire hydrant for years. My father found one, and we wound up having it in the backyard thinking the dog would like it.
That's because your bathroom wasn't working, right?
The dog ran away from it. The dog would never even go near it. But we had this for years until he finally gave it away to somebody who said, yeah, I'll take a fire hydrant. All right. But yeah, it's like if you walk around, there's tons of phones still around the city. And by tons, I mean, probably like you could count like 50 or 60 in an average walk around the city. But nobody's really using it. Who could you possibly imagine is calling for? I don't even know how much a payphone would cost right now.
I don't want to touch that thing.
Yeah, and exactly. It's sitting out there like somebody, even just the air touching it is enough to maybe make it dangerous. And it's the same thing with TV Guides. They're apparently still out there on the, besides being online, they're also still on the shelves. Some stores probably have them.
Well, a lot of times you figure, like, for example, you're a big Miami Vice guy. You might want to own every single cover of Miami Vice or MASH or Seinfeld or whatever.
I ironically do, and I do, and I have, like I said, I remember the last, around the Star Wars, I haven't bought the recent ones, but around the Star Wars Episode 1 era, I remember there was like 8 covers, and some of them were like the characters like Jar Jar and Boss Nass.
Well, that's when they started getting fancy with multiple covers. Other magazines would do that.
You knew they were in trouble when they started doing that, especially around those big movie releases or big TV shows like The Simpsons or something, because comics did it, and comics would have like multiple covers. So that's the sign of the downfall of whatever it is when they start doing too many, or like the money grab. And in this case, it probably was just a money grab to keep them fluid for the rest of that year. And they figured, Star Wars
I think they were even doing like lenticular covers and all kinds of fancy laser etching and, like collectible type of stuff.
Yeah, I have a number of those. And then they would do some throwback ones, like Frank Sinatra passing was, I think it was like the late 90s he passed. And they did some covers of Frank. And if a big actor, probably they still do stuff like that. If it's like an iconic actor from the old days, like Andy Griffith or somebody when he passed, I bet you they did an homage cover. But that's the weird thing. It's a big deal to some people. And then there's some people, I bet you if you asked your daughter, she doesn't even know what TV Guide is. She wouldn't even know. Wouldn't even know what that means. Can you identify TV Guide in this picture? And if it didn't have the words TV Guide on it, she'd be like, no, don't know what you're talking about, Dad. You're crazy.
If anybody's interested in kind of reliving their childhood through covers, there is a website called tvguidemagazine.com, and within it, there's the archives of all the covers, which is also, I believe, the internet version of the TV Guide website. There's a website, an official website. So you can kind of find all these weird covers and stuff like that as an archival, resource.
Do you think you have to pay to do it, or can you just scan through them? I guess you could probably just scan through every. I know.
I'm looking at the covers right now. They're free. They're archived.
Isn't that
not the inside of the book? The inside of the book is not there.
Just to see the cover. Isn't that pretty darn neat? And
you go week by week of entire years, and you can kind of relive your childhood.
I think we noticed that in the after we did the Starlog episode.
Oh yeah, that was cool. But that was even better because that they actually scanned the entire magazine. I don't know if anybody is out there scanning entire TV guides. That's a project that I have. Ooh.
I'm looking at a cover. It was 40 cents, and I think it was April 12th. This in 1980, almost the same week. We're recording this, and there's a young Olivia Newton-John in a special she had, and then it's like Alice, and then it was like John Ritter. No, it wasn't. Excuse me. Not John Ritter. He looked like John Ritter. It was Beau Bridges and Mork and Mindy with an artist drawing of it. It's like, it's just so cool to see it. And now it makes me wish they were still around because it brings back that fun.
Plus, the thing is that the art is so of its time. You can look at these 70s drawings of people, and they feel like 70s.
Of Vegas, an artist drawing of the cast of Vegas with Dan Tana. Robert York.
It almost looks like Star Trek when you look at these things.
There was an iconic Star Trek cover that I have, and I wound up finding it at one of like you said, at a show. I said the guy wanted like nickels for it. In reality, what I thought it would be, and I said, you know what, I want it. Look, I'm looking at Little House on the Prairie. This is awesome. All right, I got to go now. Dukes of Hazzard, here it is, the Dukes of Hazzard issue from July 1980. All right, I've got to go. I got to look at too many.
No, but again, this stuff is out there. I'm going to give you guys the links, and I will obviously include some of the art because we have some of our favorite, most memorable ones that we remember from our childhood. Not only the TV Guide ones, but also the HBO ones we used to get, every now and then.
Oh, I got one for you.
Uh-oh.
TV's Incredible Hunks.
That's what I'm looking at right now. It's Tom Wopat,
Greg
Eric
Evigan,
Estrada,
and your boy
guy?
Eric Estrada in his very, very low-cut V-neck.
Oh, Greg Evans. That's right. Wow, what was he? BJ and the Bear? Was he BJ and the Bear?
Greg Evigan was BJ and the Bear. Yeah.
BJ and the Bear. That's it. Okay. There we go.
Then the next one is Jeannie Francis of General Hospital. So there's something for everybody on this. If you go through this, you won't be disappointed.
Oh my goodness. Well, listen, I want to thank James, as usual, for taking us down this rabbit hole that we kind of fell into. And you guys for listening, and we will see you here next time at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey, movie
movie nuts.
You get more movies, more stars, more value by far on WHT, the Movie Network.
WHT gives you over 20 different uncut movies every month for the incredibly low price of $19. That's less than $1 per movie for the entire family. Join now. Call toll-free. In New York, Long Island, and Connecticut, 631-7800. In New Jersey, 672-1151.
Whatever, blah, 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 blah. The dirty hotel room.
I don't want to touch that thing.